Okay. Well, welcome. My name is Rick Thie. I'm the president of Kettering Health Foundation, and glad that you joined us today. This is our third series of this webinar with Alan Gassman and I guess friends, as we've had several of his associates and colleagues join us over the past several months in these series of presentations. So I wanted to welcome you all to today's session on charitable planning. And for those that are not familiar with Alan's background, I've had the privilege of knowing Alan for well over 10 years now, and Alan comes to us as a board-certified estate planning and trust lawyer who practices at Gassman, Crotty, Denicolo in Clearwater, Florida. And he covers a full spectrum of trust and estate planning and taxation and wealth preservation ideas. And Alan has been for us a great resource, and also for anybody that I've met that have had the chance to work with Alan. And he speaks on many tax conferences, national platforms, and we're just real honored that he's taken the time to join us and our platform here at Kettering Health Foundation to bring the latest and greatest information on the best tax optimization techniques and how that relates to charitable giving and the impact that you can make as an individual in your communities and beyond. So at this point, Alan, I'll turn it over to you. One other item is that this is all building to a crescendo moment in May 18 when we're going to have a in-person CE program in which we'll bring in 4 to 5 featured speakers, Alan being one of them. I think we have Jonathan Blattmacher on slate for that as well, to offer 4 to 5 hours of continuing education right here in Dayton, Ohio, which if many are not familiar with Dayton and you want to do a little history, it really was the Silicon Valley of the early 20th century. So I'll just put that in as a teaser and we'll come back to that later date. But Alan, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Rick, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the Wright Brothers Museum and all the other really neat things that you have there in Dayton. Anyone attending this webinar, when you get the PowerPoint deck, you can click here on Take Your Date to Dayton, and that will give you a little video on all the different things there are to see there. So my PowerPoint today comes from a UJA presentation that I gave in September, plus some added things. And one of the most creative challenges is how you get the whole family on board to do a charitable plan. And I had a very good experience today. About a year ago, a longtime client of mine who has a terminal disease told me that he would like to see his child get involved with a charity. And I said, okay, I will talk to that child for you. So we sat down and I said, I'm sorry about your father, and I know your hands are tied, but there's one thing he wanted me to mention to you, and that is he would really like to see you do something charitable with his assets. And she said, I don't have time to think about that. I don't have time to do anything. And that was the end of the conversation. Well, 2 weeks ago, she called me and said, there's a wonderful charity in the city where I live that is doing wonderful things for animals. And these are animals from the wild who get caught in the city and need to be healed and then returned. So I would like to put up a building in memory of my dad while my dad's still living so he can go to the celebration. And this was something a year ago in the conversations I had, I thought there was no chance that something like this would have happened. And this child is very, very excited about it. And I just spoke to the director of the charity, and he's very excited about it. So when you have multiple family members and one of them wants to be charitable, put your creative hat on what it takes to help the others to understand and enjoy. And remember that people have noble causes and they like to save taxes. So there's a lot of different ways that we can help this family save taxes, but they also do like recognition. Even an anonymous donor that I represent takes very big pride in the fact that it says anonymous in the plaque. because he knows it's him and he thinks it sets a great example. And then there is the desire for control. So this family is going to make darn sure that this charity stays in that charitable realm for at least 30 years and keeps that building named or any substitute building named. And people want a sense of security, which is why charitable remainder trusts, annuity trusts, and pooled income funds. So, it's not only what saves you the most taxes, it's not only the cause, but it's getting everyone on board. So, one of the ways that I try to help my clients get on board is by offering them language that they never asked for. So I'll freely admit I have long estate planning conferences with families and don't even bring up charitable unless I may say, well, is there any charity you want to make sure you support in your estate plan? And as you know, so often the answer is no. And then you go on to the next thing. Why would you even ask? So in my revocable trust agreement and in my irrevocable trust agreements, I have optional clauses and I put them in boxes. And I tell the clients in the explanation letters that I have these optional clauses that they may want to consider. So the first one you have here, and you can go to the handout section and pick up a copy of this. And if you want it in Word, I can send it to you in Word, just let me know, but it'll be somewhat corrupted because it's converted from WordPerfect, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, when you have a trust that's going to be established for somebody or family members, do they want to have the trustee able to make distributions to charities? And do they want to have that limited to a certain percentage per year of the trust assets? And do they want to limit that to charities that they've supported during their lifetime or certain categories of charities? Because it is possible for a cult to get charitable status. So what is their level of comfort with that? That's one provision. A second provision, which can be a very good step, is in my contingent final distribution, which almost nobody ever reads, which typically says, well, half will go to my wife's heirs, half will go to my heirs. People don't think about it. Well, I have a charitable section there, and I can ask the clients, hey, if you're all wiped out in an airplane wreck, what charities would you want to help, or who would you want to help? So a lot of times the charities will go into the contingent distribution provision. And then later, when the clients come to update the plan, I'll say, well, I see you have something for the YMCA. If you all pass away, do you want to do something for the YMCA? And let me mention that as people get older, wealthier, and more mature, they will tend to become more charitable. So just because they had no interest in charity 10 years ago doesn't mean that you should not ask them now. So this provision is half to our parents and half to our charities. Now, this is also fairly popular provision. I say, okay, your children are going to get 20 million each or more. Do you want any overflow to go to a foundation where they can work together and run things for charity? It could even employ your children and great-grandchildren, and no creditor and no spouse of your children is ever going to wrestle control of this charitable foundation away from them in a divorce action. So this particular couple said, yeah, we love the idea of having a charitable foundation named after us, and we would like to give that foundation 30% instead of Uncle Sam getting 12% and our children getting 18%, as long as our children get at least 15 million. And the children already have a nice net worth. So there's the language for you. And, I think it was Warren Buffett. Did he say nobody really needs more than 10 million? And if you give them more than 10 million, you may be ruining their lives. So how about 7.5 million per child and everything else in equal shares to charitable foundations for children? Now, here's another one here. This couple wants their children to get no more than 50 million, and everything above that, at first they were thinking a charitable lead trust where there would be no estate tax, and then after the 15th or 20th year, what's left would go to the children. But then they were thinking, why not just have it go to our foundation? So I checked around and found that you could just give the trustee the choice. You don't have to decide now. So this provision says, if my spouse doesn't survive me, as long as there's 50 million or more passing under this plan for our children, and it can be inflation adjusted, then everything above that goes to a charitable lead annuity trust, but the trustee of the charitable lead annuity trust can in effect disclaim it to the family foundation. So the children can get together and decide what they want to do, and then encourage the trustee to do that. Now, another idea is I hereby give my daughter $1 million on my death, but if she's estate taxable, then she can disclaim the million and it will go to the museum that I founded. But if she is not estate taxable, if this would cause estate tax to be incurred on her death by reason of her net worth being over $15 million at the time of my death, then she disclaims to charity. But if she's well under the exemption, then I leave it to her and I request that she give it to the museum over time to get the best income tax result. So, you know, she can decide, does she want to disclaim it to the museum, or does she want to accept it and give it to the museum? If she accepts it, then I will not have the estate tax deduction on my estate taxes. Now, I mixed that all up and I said it all wrong, but hopefully you see what I'm talking about there, to program flexibility into your documents. So let's not forget that your clients cannot give 300 per person or 600 per married couple this year without itemizing. But if they itemize, then they can get a charitable deduction. So you need to go ahead, and usually clients will bunch their donations. You wouldn't donate every year to your church 10,000 a year. You would donate 50,000 to a donor advised fund, and then have the donor advised fund donate 10,000 a year to the family. So that is the bunching. And the same thing if the client is over 70 and a half. It didn't go up to 72 with minimum distributions. At 70 and a half, you can satisfy your minimum distribution requirement for up to 100,000 by saying, hey, don't give it to me, give it to Rick's hospital system. And that way I won't have to pay income tax on it. And maybe Rick will take me bird shooting sometime. All right. Page 6 is if you have a house that's a tear down or dilapidated or just something you're going to replace. Well, if you're on the water, put the house on a barge and take it to a boys' ranch or a girls' camp and donate it based upon the value of that structure. And it may have a great value if it's an antique. Otherwise, consider having one of those schools that teaches people how to recycle houses come in, or consider having a fire department come in and burn it. There is case law on these things. So it is, I think, pretty interesting. Now, when you have clients that are giving more than 50 or 60% of their adjusted gross income, then they can still make interest-free loans to charity, no limit on that. The charity can invest the money in a bond fund and keep the difference. They can still provide rent-free use to the charity. They can still have their companies advertise and sponsor things and take a Section 162 business write-off if that's what it is. And they can also make gifts of up to $16,000 a person, next year up to $17,000 a person, to family members who may be inclined to give to charity and get an income tax deduction. So those are all just little ideas. The other idea is that they can fund a complex trust, a trust that earns income and pays taxes on its income. And if a complex trust contains a provision which says that distributions of income can be made to one or more charities, or even one charity in particular, then the income that goes to the charity is not subject to income tax because the trust gets a deduction under Code Section 642C. So now, if the trust does not have that provision from the very beginning, it's too late for the trust protectors to add it, but the trust could invest its assets in a partnership. Maybe the trust has 95% ownership, the client puts in assets for 5% ownership, then the partnership makes the gift of income, and the trust gets the deduction on the K1. So that would be if you have a client with a high income asset, an ordinary income asset, like an oil and gas type of situation or a royalty situation, you could put that in a NING where it is not taxable to the client, it's taxable to the NING as a complex trust. You can let the NING go ahead and give its income to the charity, and then you can let the advisory committee of the NING bring the client back in as a beneficiary later on if the client asks and everybody still likes the client. How about your jewelry? I went to Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, and I kept seeing all these jewelry display cases. And I always wondered, why are they displaying all this jewelry? It looks old and we're young and we don't care about it. Well, if you donate your jewelry or artwork to a charity that makes use of it, then you get the deduction. And you can value that used jewelry higher than what the estate can actually sell it for. And the reason for that is because the IRS guidelines allows you to use the value that the used jewelry would have in a retail store that sells used jewelry. So, why wait another 10 years to die and have your jewelry sold for $50,000 when you could donate it today, value it at maybe $100,000, get a $40,000 income tax benefit, and go buy more jewelry? So when you have those little things, I was very pleased to accept a French horn from a client. She found out that we have a little music foundation that my wife and I operate, and all we do is give free music lessons to needy children. There are 4 to 5 of them. Not a big expensive thing, but it feels good to do. And had a client with an extra French horn, and I know a charity that needs the use of a French horn. So she felt pretty good about that. Creativity doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be effective. So one thing I wanted to mention is, please, if you can, have the client make their moves before the liquidity event and not after the liquidity event. So make sure that your partners in the transaction department and your CPA friends, etc., know that if you sell, for example here, $1 million asset, zero basis, if you donate 1/5 of it to charity and then you sell 4/5, then you're going to pay capital gains tax on $800,000, and the capital gains tax on the 1/5 that you gave to charity is never incurred. So you end up with a net amount higher by about $48,000 if you donate 20% to charity. Now, you're going to say, well, this doesn't work under the assignment of income rule. And I am going to say, as long as the donor had no binding legal obligation to sell the asset, then the deduction occurs, and the charity does not pay income tax on the sale, and neither does the donor. So how about if you structure your transaction so that it stays at the letter of intent stage, until 3 days before the closing, when you know darn well you're going to close. You've worked out all the language of the sale agreement, and then you give 20% to the charity. And then now you're going to say, well, wait a minute, 20% isn't worth 20% because of discounts. Well, you give the charity a put. So you're giving them not only 20% ownership, but also the right to be cashed in by the company anytime on 3 months' notice based on full fair market value of the company multiplied by 20%. Then the charity, of course, goes along with the sale and gets their 20%, so they never have to exercise their put option. So if you can do this earlier rather than later. Now, a lot of times what's being sold is an S corporation situation, and you cannot give stock of an S corporation to charity very effectively because the charity has to pay tax under the unrelated business income tax at 100% rate on S corp income or the sale of S corp stock. So what you would do there is the S corp would transfer ownership of 20% of its assets to a charity. The S corp gets the deduction. The deduction flows through to your client on the K1. Then the S corp sells the assets, and the purchaser buys 20% of the assets from the charity. Now, don't try this at home, but with help, and I get help too because this is a very complicated area, you can do these things that we are describing. But what's even better for a liquidity event is explained as follows. Well, Floyd, you're going to sell the company. That's fantastic. It's a C Corp stock, or it's a partnership interest, and you're going to pay capital gains tax plus the Medicare 3.8% tax if you don't work in the company. You may even have some ordinary income depreciation recapture. How would you like to defer paying that tax for 15 to 20 years? Oh, you might need it earlier? Okay, well, what if you could pull out about 11% of the value of what's in the sales proceeds every year, but if you don't use it, it stays in this trust arrangement, and then you'll pay tax when you pull it out. And if you have a really bad year with net operating losses or tax rates go down, then you could pull it out then. Otherwise, you'll wait about 14 years, and when you finally do pull everything out, it's only taxable to the extent that you would have paid tax on the transaction plus taxable gains earned thereafter. And then the client says, I would like to consider doing that. Okay, well, in order to do that, approximately 10% of the value will have to pass to a charity at the end of the 20th year. Is that okay? Well, what charity can it be? Well, it could be a charitable foundation set up by your children in year 19. Okay, and how much income tax will it save me? Well, it will defer all income taxes from your transaction. Okay, well, what if I need to borrow the money from the charitable remainder trust? Can I borrow the money from the charitable remainder trust? The answer is that under the self-dealing rules, you cannot borrow the money from the charitable remainder trust unless there is no income tax deduction and no gift tax deduction on the formation and funding of the charitable remainder unit trust. If you cannot and do not take a gift tax deduction, and you cannot and do not take an income tax deduction, then you still get all your tax deferral, and the charitable remainder trust could loan significant monies to your family business at arm's length interest. Your family business will pay a tax deductible interest, and the charitable remainder trust will not recognize the interest income until you get a withdrawal. So how do you do that? Well, you eliminate the income tax deduction by having potential beneficiaries be cemetery associations and/or police or fire benevolent associations. Those organizations qualify as remainder beneficiaries of a charitable remainder trust, but disqualify the charitable remainder trust from getting an income tax deduction. The second thing you do is you don't make the contribution to the charitable remainder unit trust. You contribute assets to an irrevocable dynasty trust or a SLAT for your spouse and your children. That is a gift, the transfer of those assets. You file a gift tax return or you get a note back. You could do an installment sale. Now, the SLAT or the dynasty trust makes the contribution to the charitable remainder trust, and there's no gift. There's no transfer from any person to outside of that person. So that would be the way to have a really supercharged charitable remainder trust, also known as a NIMCRUT. Now, the IRS, this self-dealing rule exception is right in the Internal Revenue Code. And the service issued 2 private letter rulings. Jonathan Blottmacher and Richard Fox wrote about both of them for the Lineberg system. And they are quite nice, but the service will no longer rule on them. But it is in the Internal Revenue Code. So who knows? Now, page 13. You have a lot of clients who have variable annuities. You probably didn't recommend them, but now they have them. They've gone up in value, and it's ordinary income when you take it out. So you can consider taking the money out of the variable annuity and then putting it into a charity, or possibly whether to donate the variable annuity to charity. I don't think the donation works well because you'll trigger ordinary income if you donate an appreciated variable annuity to charity. But what you could do is provide in the annuity contract beneficiary designation that on my death, I leave an amount equal to the excess of the value of the variable annuity over the income tax basis of the variable annuity to ABC charity, and the remainder to the GST trust for my children, so that you won't have to pay income tax on the variable annuity income. And of course, you can do the same thing with IRAs, and most people think about that, but they don't really think about what to do with these appreciated activities. So let me see where I wanted to go next. The last thing I'll mention, just because it's the talk of the town, is the $1.6 billion donation by a politically motivated, very wealthy individual to a 501c4 social welfare organization. Now, there's no income tax deduction for putting money in a social welfare organization, so he would have saved a lot more taxes if he had done that. But he did not have to pay any taxes on the sale of the business. So there were still a lot of income tax savings that occurred. Now, the 501c4, if you want to do this safely, it can spend about 40% of its money on active political contributions to candidates and parties. And then it can spend about 60% of its income on social, what I will call social welfare messaging, which can be quite opinionated. So it could be for or against abortion, it could be for or against immigration reform, it could be against racism, and that could help a political party indirectly during an election time. And these 501c4s also are not considered to be disqualified persons under the self-dealing rules. So let's say I have a company and I'd like to give 60% of my company to my foundation to get a deduction, and I want to keep 40% in control. I give 1% to the social welfare organization that I form and that I control as a fiduciary, and then I give 40% non-voting to my private foundation, but I give it a put right. And then I give the remaining percentage, 59% non-voting, to myself. I keep it, or I put it into a spousal limited access trust, whatever I want to do. Well, I'm not subject to the excess business holding rules until 5 years after the donation. And I'm not subject to the self-dealing rules because it's a 501c4 that owns the voting stock. Then within the 5th year, to get out of the excess business holding rules, my private foundation can become a public charity. And the first thing you say is, how can your private foundation become a public charity? Wouldn't it have to get at least 1/3 of its donations from the general public or meet the other similar test? And the answer is, well, it could be a school or a medical research organization or a clinic that qualifies as a hospital, or a church, synagogue, or mosque. So those are all, really good alternatives on how to get an outstanding income tax deduction while you're alive for sharing ownership of your company. Another way to do it is to work with a foundation, work with a community foundation. They tend to be extremely trustworthy and extremely conscientious. And the people who work for the charitable foundation in your community foundation, are usually underpaid, overworked, and extremely well-meaning. So they are just wonderful people to have. So keeping this to 30 minutes from when I started, I'll just mention it. Page 22, you've got a company worth $3 million. It's going to be worth $5 million. You sell 99% of its stock to a dynasty trust for a $2 million note. Then the dynasty trust contributes that stock to a flip NIMCRUT that I was mentioning. And then the company sells for $5 million. There's no income tax on the $5 million until it's pulled out of the flip NIMCRUT. The alternative is, first you put the assets into the flip NIMCRUT. Then what is the value? Let's say I put $5 million worth of assets in a flip NIMCRUT. It's going to pay me 11% a year for 20 years, 10% remainder to charity. But I'm not the trustee of the flip NIMCRUT, and you can't be sure whether you're going to get any distributions before year 20. The flip NIMCRUT is worth a lot less than 90% of $5 million. Maybe the flip NIMCRUT ownership rights are only worth 2 or 3 million or 2 million. If the flip NIMCRUT is owned by an LLC and you transfer the non-voting interest in an LLC that owns a flip NIMCRUT to the dynasty trust, you may get a powerful, very powerful discount and significant savings for a family. So Rick, those are my creative ideas for planning. I hope we can come back and do more sometime. And I welcome any questions, comments, or suggestions. You've got my email address here, agassman@gassmanpa.com. And I hope that some of you will visit us in Dayton, Ohio,
Yes.
for this wonderful event, Thursday, May 18. And then we'll take a tour of the Wright Brothers Museum and the other cool things that are in Dayton, close to Cleveland, see the Rock and Roll Museum, and then go home with new knowledge, having helped Kettering Hospital System.
Thank you, Alan. I look forward to seeing everyone, and thank you again for these awesome words of wisdom. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.